Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to all of the incredible speakers today. I truly appreciate the time that we've spent together and hearing all the questions and just the engagement that you've had, and knowing that you're here learning about these critical matters. So for those of you who may not have been here earlier, my name is Peyton Pitawanakwat, and I am a proud Mississauga Anishinaabe. I'm very grateful to be here today. Nimigwachawendam. So first off, I want to express my sincere gratitude to Senator McFedrin for asking me to co-host this year's Youth Parliamentarian Nuclear Summit. Miigwech for your support. Creating these spaces is so critical to advancing nuclear justice. Last year was the first summit where we came together to discuss nuclear disarmament and the impacts of the nuclear industry on nations across Turtle Island. I say that because these borders may separate us geographically and politically, but we are all connected. We know that what impacts one will impact another, and we know that the health of Shkakmakwe, which is Mother Earth, determines the health of us. So the nuclear industry is much the same. The mining, the transportation, the use of nuclear fuel, and the waste, these are all pieces that are interconnected. So we have to acknowledge that within each step, there's considerable risk and harm being done to marginalized people who disproportionately bear the weight of this industry. My First Nation community is one of them. So Mississauga, which is located along the north shore of Lake Huron, we are a member of the Anishinaabe Nation and is signatory to the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. Our name is the same name of the river that flows through our territory. My family traveled the river extensively. During the winter months, our families would branch off of the river and, they'd occupy areas for hunting and gathering. And then during the summer months, we would reconnect at the mouth of the river to celebrate and participate in ceremonies with one another. In fact, one of the largest ceremonial lodges was found near the mouth of the river. The river had provided grounds for wild rice and cranberries, name, which is sturgeon. And when I think about what that would have looked like, I imagine the power of that space and all of its incredible history. But this is such a different perspective than the corporation's understanding. And I like to quote one of their review of their environmental risk assessment from 2020, which states, prior to the construction of the refinery in the 1980s, the property was undeveloped with no permanent residences. Much of the general area is vegetated or wetlands with little agricultural activity, as is typical for Northern Ontario. So this is a very misleading phrase to use when, my history and understanding of the area is so much different. And when we visit the area today, my heart grieves for my people and how much we've lost that we've had to experience. It's now a space of injustice. Today, this space is occupied by a golf course and the world's largest uranium refinery. The facility refines uranium concentrates from all over the world to produce uranium trioxide. So where our ceremonial lodges once stood, where our ancestors were and are still buried, artifacts of the past, most of this was removed, stolen, and taken to museums across the country during the 1970s and 80s. Every year, thousands of people visit this golf course, oblivious to the truth that lies below their feet. Golf carts and visitors drive over our graves, desecrating our burial sites and places of ceremony. It took over 40 years of fighting to have our people return to us, decades of leaders and elders before me who had their stories silenced. So this past fall, after many years of this, our ancestors were finally given back to us. We were able to gather through ceremony to celebrate their return and reunite them with the land. This represented a huge milestone for us, but the work is far from over. It's rather a shift towards the beginning of reclamation. There are still many changes that need to be made if we are to truly achieve meaningful reconciliation. These changes must happen in all areas, the decision-making processes, the environmental monitoring, human health monitoring, and how can we ensure the safety of our people if our voices are not being included? If the data that is being collected is not indicative of our lifestyle or our traditional knowledge. In the early 1990s, our community received support from the International Institute of Concern for Public Health to conduct a preliminary study on the health and environmental impacts of the refinery. And the study was prompted by concerns following the release of 178 kilograms of yellow cake from the refinery stacks, which resulted in many community members who remember seeing yellow dust settling on their cars and on their homes. The findings of the study indicated that local vegetation, including medicinal herbs commonly used by our community members, contained uranium levels significantly higher than background levels measured before the refinery's operations. So every day, contaminants are being released into the air. They're being released into our river, contaminating our fish, our plants, our medicines, and our water. Why do we have to wait for something major to happen to take action or create better safeguards? Why do we have to fight for the protection of our people? The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples highlights the principle of free, prior, and informed consent as a fundamental right for Indigenous communities when making decisions that affect their lands, resources, and cultures. In the context of nuclear decision-making, FPIC ensures that Indigenous peoples have the right to actively participate in and consent to any nuclear-related activities that may impact their territories, whether it be mining, waste disposal, or the establishment of nuclear facilities. This principle upholds the autonomy of Indigenous communities and protects our environmental, cultural, and social interests. A failure to implement FPIC in nuclear decision-making processes is a violation of Indigenous rights. In 2024, Mississauga First Nation submitted comments on the proposed revisions of the corporation's preliminary decommissioning plan for its uranium conversion facility in Port Hope. The proposal stated that the corporation intended to consolidate and dispose of all waste from their 3 facilities in Ontario at the Blind River Refinery. This includes transporting and disposing of all uranium-contaminated materials and soils to the site to be held in a constructed waste storage cell housing 148,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste. Despite the false framing of having public support, Mississauga First Nation did not receive any written communication or direct notice from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission regarding the hearing, nor were we engaged in the consultation despite the potential impacts. And this highlights a broader issue of neglecting the consultation rights of Indigenous communities. In addition to UNDRIP, Bill C-226, which focuses on creating a national strategy to address environmental racism and promote environmental justice, points out that people living in areas with environmental hazards are often from Indigenous, racialized, or marginalized communities. It also suggests that placing dangerous sites like landfills or polluting industries in these areas may be a form of racial discrimination. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Toxics has also stated that environmental injustices are still an issue in Canada, with Indigenous peoples being the most impacted. Everything I am is because of my community, and to be here today means so much to me. My love for my home has really guided me on this path so that I can continue to shed light on the environmental racism that happens across this country, so that we can awake that fire and feed that fire within each of us to question ourselves and how we can be the change. We heard Elder Claudette Commanda speak about responsibility, and I think that is something that we learn from a young age in our First Nation communities. Our elders have always taught us that whether we accept it or not, we do have a responsibility to the next 7 generations. Our choices, big or small, will have an impact on the future of this world. We owe it to our ancestors and the many sacrifices they have had to make to break cycles and challenge systems that have oppressed us. And that's something that I think about often. When I'm tired or feeling like this is so heavy, I find strength in remembering that call, the who and why I do it for. So my daughter, Babonanang, who is here today, she was born during the first snowfall of the year, and when she was 4 days old, we took her into our lodge, and our community elder asked the spirits to help us find her name. So Babonanang, which means winter star in Anishinaabe, Senator Osler spoke about acts of resilience this morning, and I find it quite fitting to share the story of my daughter because her presence gives me hope in being able to practice my culture, gather in ceremony despite our displacement, I know that one day she'll grow up and inherit the legacy of our people, and she is the next generation of Indigenous leaders, much like all of you here today in this room. We heard the very real and very horrific realities that people in time have faced from nuclear. You are exactly where you're meant to be, and you're here for a reason to share, to learn, and to gain new perspectives. And I want to thank you for your dedication and for listening with an open heart during our time spent together.
Thank you so much, Peyton. And thank you to Dylan and to Bebon for being with us here as well. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Nancy Covington. Great to see you on the screen. It was great to see you in Ottawa in November when we did the Public Health Impact Seminar. And it's over to you, Dr. Covington.
Thank you very much. Amazing, Peyton. I have to acknowledge all the rest of the amazing speakers, the technology, the organizers. In particular, Elder Claudette Commando's quote right from the beginning strikes a note with me. She said, "What you do to nature, you do to yourself." Her comment rings so true regarding uranium, the key component of nuclear bombs and nuclear power. We know there are unhealed scars on the earth left by mining, piles of toxic radioactive waste which spoil all the places we used to go to. Here in Mi'kma'ki, where I am, modern-day Nova Scotia, we are saying, unfortunately, very loudly, uranium, leave it in the ground, as today in Nova Scotia, over our 30-year-old ban on uranium mining is being challenged. I don't know if the slides are there, but maybe you could go to slide number 2 if that's possible. I would like to introduce a few unpopular or hidden nuclear topics. I want to bring to light a couple of them because I think they need to be addressed in order to fully abolish nuclear weapons. The two main treaties to rid the world of nuclear weapons are the TPNW and the cornerstone, as we've heard so much about, the NPT, but they both embrace nuclear power. However, there are links between nuclear power and nuclear weapons, which are evident. Of course, there's denialism about the harmful effects of low-level ionizing radiation, and nuclear power is being promoted, as we know. TPNW copied the phrase about the peaceful use of nuclear power directly from the Non-Proliferation Treaty into its wording. The adoption of this phrase was controversial at the time that the TPNW was formed, but it was done to achieve consensus. Thus, the two main treaties embrace nuclear power. But when people talk about how to encourage Canadian participation at the third meeting of States Party, as we know you have just done with your letter, we avoid talking about these hidden topics. We have good reason to avoid it. They are too controversial, and indeed talking about nuclear power antagonizes a large fraction of people who are anti-nuclear weapons but pro-nuclear power. Yet, nuclear power, nuclear weapons are intimately related. In fact, many groups say we have to abolish both in order to fully abolish nuclear weapons. Instead of sidelining these topics, I think we need to bring them out in the open to fully discuss. If you have slide number 4 there, I would like it put on if that's possible. Anyway, this slide shows a picture. President Macron of France has made a rather famous quote. "Without civilian nuclear energy, there is no use of this technology, And without military, there is no nuclear energy. And sorry, I don't have it in the original French. In other words, these technologies coexist. And this fact is reflected in the observation that nuclear weapons have nations tend to also have the most nuclear power plants. Canada is a bit of an exception, but probably related to the fact we were intimately related to the Manhattan Project years and years ago. Nuclear power powers the bomb is a slogan which has been taken up by youth at the recent COP meeting, especially by youth members of our group, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War.
Dr. Covington, this is the Wicked Witch speaking.
This is the Wicked Witch. I thought I would get you there.
Can we wrap it up in 30 seconds, please?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, there's India that got a nuclear, exploded this bomb because Canada gave them a research reactor. And it turns out that it's 6 kilograms that will make you a Nagasaki bomb. And unfortunately, all plutonium's considered weapons usable. The better refined it is, the bigger the bang. And that is what some of the small modular nuclear reactor plans want to do. So I will leave it at that because I think we need to discuss it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the additional information and the overview that you've really presented to us as the closing speaker for the conference.